Papa, did you know Paul B. Sears?
Yes, I know him very well.
Could you tell me a little bit about your
Well,
relationship?
yes, back in the Dust Bowl days, at just the beginning of the 7-year depression in the country, Cleo and I decided to get out of the dust. We would go to the western part of the state, the Black Hills, which were the air was cleaner. And then we decided we just didn't want to go back to the eastern part, but would rather go on. So we flipped a coin to see whether we should go to the University of Wyoming summer session or to the University of Colorado summer session. And the coin said Wyoming, and we went to Wyoming. And our first day there, they had a campfire at night around which people sat in a circle and enjoyed the fire. We hadn't met Paul Sears yet, but he was there. And Paul had an eye for beautiful women. And as you know, your grandmother was an extremely beautiful woman, and she went out and sat down and saved a place what she thought would be for me, and but Paul spied her and went over and sat down beside her, and so I had to go and sit on the other side, and Paul was she was between us, and Paul decided, after he had introduced himself, he decided to have a smoke, so he got his pipe, and he cleaned it, and he scraped it, all the ashes out of it, and he knocked it on it, and he fixed it up in just beautiful shape, and then he got his tobacco, and he packed it just right. A pipe has to be packed just right. If it's packed too tight, it'll keep going out, and I have to keep lighting it, and if it's packed too loose, it'll burn out too soon. But he got his just right, and he settled back and started reaching for a match in his pocket. No match. He reached in every pocket he had, and there were no matches. At Cleo, your grandmother was sitting between us, and she had a little leather jacket with a little fur collar around, and she never smoked, but why she had a little box of matches in her pocket, I'll never know, but she reached in her pocket, and she got out, and she said, "Dr. Sears, I think this is what you may be looking for." Oh, he was delighted. He got the match and started his pipe and had a wonderful time. And we got well acquainted with Paul. And I went with him. He was interested in a snow mass, which was in effect really a glacier, and the yearly deposits of snow, and he was getting a pollen, studying a pollen, try to see if there's any variation over a short period of time in the number of pollen, and I went with him, and the summer school ended. And when the summer school ends, you're ready to go home. I wanted to go home. And I went out, we got the car packed, all ready to go, and I went out and sat under the wheel and waiting for Cleo to come. And here comes Paul Sears, plops down beside me, starts telling me about Norman in Oklahoma. And if there was anything I wasn't interested in was Norman and Oklahoma. And but I was polite and didn't insult him or ask him to get out or anything. I hoped he would get out, but finally he said, I lost my plant anatomist this last spring to the University of California at Berkeley. And he said, I haven't replaced him yet. I'm looking for just the right person. And as you know, my field was plant anatomy, plant mechanics of plant growth.
Plant morphology.
So, well, I still wasn't very much interested in what he was saying, but then he said, I haven't replaced him, still looking for the right man. And then he said, and I'm quoting him accurately, be glad to have you join us if you think you'd like it down there. And I said, now, just a minute, Dr. Sears, are you offering me a job at the university? Oh, be glad to have you join us if you think you'd like it. I said, well, are you authorized to just hire this way? I said, could I accept a job and come up there? Well, he would wire the president and have the president wire me the offer, which he did, and I accepted. And that's how I got to the University of Oklahoma as an assistant professor of botany at an increase in salary of $100 over a year, that is.
All right.
Not a month, but a year over what I was getting up at. That's the way I got to.
So you were about 25 at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so how old was Paul Sears? Do you remember? Do you remember about how old Paul Sears was when he was offering you the job?
Yes, Paul was would have been in his early 50s or late 40s. He was still a young man. He's a father, you know, of ecology, and
did he have a fairly substantial reputation by then?
yes, he had a substantial reputation for having written articles for newspapers which got him criticized. He criticized the way the whites used the land.
Oh, really?
And he said the Indians used it much better, which they did, of course, as you know. And but he really made his mark when he came. I came down here, and I was so impressed with the work he was doing that I offered to teach one of his classes, and then another member of the faculty taught another course, and left him free to ride deserts on the march, which is the Bible. That's the beginning of modern ecology.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about that. So he was head of the botany department at OU.
He was head of the botany department at OU, and that's why he was looking for a structure botanist, a plant anatomist. And let's see, I think that was about 33 along in there.
33. Around 33. Okay. So how long were you a professor? A professor before you moved?
I was pretty lucky, really. I was an assistant professor, and in 9 years I became president.
That's very impressive.
Well,
so when did
making a pretty good headway?
Making me feel like I'm a real underachiever.
Yeah, And of course, your extremely beautiful grandmother was a great help to me. She just was, I wouldn't have made it at all without her. I mean, people, I had the ability, but I wasn't able to put it across and make people know it. But she would attract attention with her beauty and she was not only a beautiful woman, but she was a brilliant woman. Just had a terrific memory, you know. She just remembered everything. And to give you an example of a remarkable memory, the first Saturday night after we had moved to Norman, we went down to the Sooner Theater to see a show, and we came out, and there was a little fellow with a little mustache. He was pulling his coat around him, and she grabbed my arm. Now remember, I'd been teaching 4 years at the University of South Dakota.
Mm-hmm. She
grabbed my arm, and she said, "I know that man. His name is Royden Dangerfield. He was registered at the Placement Bureau at the University of Chicago when I was receptionist there. And I think he's in political science this 4 years." And we'd go to a meeting of the OU alumni, and I would stay close to her because you remember we had one meeting over Eufaula where there were 50 couples, and she remembered all but 2 of them. As we left,
That's pretty amazing.
I stuck right with her, and so she would call a name, you know, and I would be able to add my
and act like you remember him too.
my appreciation for being there. We'd go on, but you know me, how I'm interested maybe in the first 8 or 10 I'm introduced to, but after that, they're just people.
Well, so you got to the university, and I'm not holding you to the year, because I know that you haven't studied up on this lately, but
Would you mind repeating that?
No, I'm just saying, how long was it until you moved into administration at OU?
Well, there was a man who was named Homer Dodge, who was dean of a graduate college, and he was very sensitive to tobacco smoke, but he and I had similar interests in travel. We wanted to go visit the Bridges region, and Rainbow Bridge included.
Rainbow Bridge?
Yeah, we went to Rainbow Bridge together, and we camped out. In those days, it was safe enough to just drive a half a mile off the highway, and one roll your sleeping bag. Wouldn't be safe anymore, I suppose, and well, I'm sure it wouldn't be. And we had this trip together, and as we were coming home, he said, "I noticed you quit smoking." And I said, "Well, not really. I haven't smoked on this trip because I know how sensitive you are to tobacco smoke, and even out of doors, there's no use, annoying you." And he said, "You mean you can turn it on or off as you please?" And I said, "Well, if ever comes the time when I can't, I'll surely quit smoking, and I will not become addicted And so his assistant dean had resigned to do something. I've forgotten his name. Was Warden Dangerfield. That's that one that Cleo had spotted. And I don't remember why he resigned, but there was something he wanted to do. And so the Dean Dodge offered me a job as assistant dean.
Assistant dean of the graduate school?
That's right.
Basically his assistant?
Uh-huh.
Now, what was his field? What was
Dodge's
Homer Dodge's field?
Well, he was really a, how would you describe his field? Science was his field. I don't recall just which branch of science he was interested in. Might have been, it was either mathematics or physics, but I've forgotten which. At my age, you forget things.
Same here, at my age. This, I think you and I actually looked at the slides last night of the 30-mile hike to and from Rainbow Bridge with Homer Dodge, and he apparently was getting into trouble scampering up and down into ruins. And so that was in 1940, so you became assistant dean in the graduate school around 1940. And then
43 I was named president.
well, how did that happen?
Huh?
How did you become president?
Well, that's an interesting story. The Joe Brandt had resigned as president. Sally Brandt had been very unhappy, his wife. And the alumni suggested to the regents that if they would get some participation from the faculty in selecting a new president, that they would give them a feeling of parenthood, and they would excuse as many misadventures much more quickly than if they hadn't had a voice. And so they decided to invite the faculty to participate. And so the faculty senate elected a committee to cooperate with them, and I was named chairman of that committee. And I gave them some really good names. The president of the University of Wyoming, who later went to be president of the University of Minnesota. And although we gave them a dozen or more good names. They couldn't make up their minds, so they asked me if I would keep the shop open for a while they continued to search. And I said, if they didn't do it too long, I would be glad to. He said, don't misunderstand, we're not considering you for the presidency at all. But you're just to keep the shop open. So they met on Friday, and they came to the campus always on Thursday night. And Cleo would cook them a fine dinner. She was a fine cook, and utterly charming. And she just simply charmed them to the point where they couldn't make up their mind at all on what to do, and they finally got around to the point that this woman was so utterly charming and would make such a good president's wife. How were things going while I was looking after the shop? And so they checked around. They found out that I had done pretty well. Two competing factions had changed their opinions. They were arguing about whether the university college should be 1 year or 2 years. And I got that all straightened out, and they found out I'd been doing pretty well, so they made me president.
Permanent president?
Huh?
They made you permanent president? Or?
Made me president.
Yeah.
I was
Here.
overwhelmed, of course, because they told me they weren't considering me, and I was impatient with them because they'd taken so long, and I wanted to get back and
Get back into
do my research.
when you were a dean of.
I was a plant anatomist.
Yeah, but before you were president, were you dean of the graduates still, or still assistant?
Well, indeed, yeah, the war came, and Dodge was taken to Washington to head up the manpower situation and I was acting dean, and for a while.
But did you continue to teach?
Huh?
Were you continuing to teach?
Well, yes, I still taught, I had one course. That finally, Dodge resigned to take the presidency of a college over on the East Coast somewhere. And then they got around to making me president.
And that was 43 or 44, somewhere around there.
Beg pardon?
That was in 43 or 44, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I was named in December of 43.
Okay, I think that'll end this session for right now. Okay, this will be session number 3 of our recording session. Poppa, I wanted to ask you about, through the years, the interesting visitors that had visited the president's home. I understand that apparently there weren't too many hotels near the university, and for that reason you had a lot of visitors in the president's home.
Well, Lynn, there are just so many of them that, and everybody stayed there of any importance at all, but Eleanor Roosevelt was the one that impressed me the most, and as I say, Harry Truman was there, and of course Lord Halifax.
Well, do you remember anything about
He's the one, he and Lady Halifax left their shoes out to be shined, and we didn't have a houseboy, so I had to hunt up some black shoe polish and took a little hunting, and but I put a shine on the shoes that any private or waiting inspection could be proud of, and Cleo participated only to the extent of making disparaging remarks about the job I was doing. But later, when she gave a speech to a group here in Norman, she said, "We shined the shoes," which was a big farce.
And who was Lord Halifax?
Lord Halifax, British ambassador from...
He was the ambassador to the U.S. from Britain, and he was visiting the university, and so you had to shine his shoes for him. Now, do you remember anything about Eleanor Roosevelt's visit?
About her what?
Eleanor Roosevelt's visit to the university. Do you remember anything about her visit to the university?
Well, I told you about her dress sagging and putting the safety pin in to hold the strap together, and that she attracted such an audience that they couldn't fit him in the ballroom, and that she was writing on My Day then, which was published daily, and she had her secretary along. Secretary slept in slept in what was really Braden's room, and Braden, Bill, slept in the middle room, and every morning she'd get her secretary and dictate my day and mail it off to the press. And, she was a remarkable woman, just a remarkable woman. Lord and Lady Halifax, I was not so impressed. Well, I shouldn't say that, but they seemed stiff and unrelaxed or something. I don't know how to put it, but of course they were there, and we looked after them as best we could.
Well, speaking of undergarments, is that perhaps connected with the way you met your wife, Cleo, something to do with her undergarment?
What?
I think I remember reading in something you've written that the way you met my grandmother, Cleo, was she was not completely buttoned up or something like that. When you noticed her when she was coming through the line at the cafeteria.
Well,
And you offered to button her up. Or you suggested that she button up her dress.
oh, that's when I met your grandmother.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you about.
Well, that, when I was in college, I had a job washing dishes as a part of my athletic scholarship. Played football, and the dishwashing job was in between two women's halls, Lakota and Winona Hall. They came through to eat, and I was sitting there early one morning having some bacon and eggs, my sophomore year, thinking that I would be to have the first look at the new freshman women. It was the first day of school. And so here about 50 came. In those days, they dressed up the first day of school. And I took a look at the first dozen or so. And I'd seen better. I'd seen worse, of course, but along about 12th down the line was just simply a dazzler. I had never seen in all my life anywhere as pretty a woman. I was going down that line, reaching over and getting things from putting on a tray. And every time she'd reach, I was looking over, watching her after I found her. I didn't look at anybody else. But every time she'd reach, I noticed she'd missed a couple of hooks in a dark velvet type outer garment, and there'd be a gap that exposed a pink undergarment. So I left my bacon and eggs and went over and said to her, now you may know this, but I want to be sure you know it. You missed a couple of hooks. And when you reach to get something, your dark overgarment splits and exposes a pink undergarment. And she flashed an appreciative smile, and then went on like this. And, holding her arm against the exposure area, and but she took zoology her first year, and I took zoology my second year, and we were in the same class. And in the first laboratory, she went to sharpen her pencil. I noticed that mine needed to be sharpened, so I hustled over to sharpen the pencil. And we exchanged pleasantries, but I didn't get her name till later. And she was the girl for me for 72 years.
So were you married 72 years? That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
72 years of marriage.
Well,
that's something to be proud of.
and
And I understand that her family was not exactly enthusiastic about your courtship.
that's an understatement. I don't know why they disliked me so much. I had never thought of myself as being a dislikable person, but her sister Elsie was just determined, and her mother. I decided to graduate in 3 years, which I did from college. Then I started a master's degree by going to the University of Chicago. And while I was gone, they talked her into going to the University of Minnesota. That was a mistake they made because we hadn't planned to get married until I had my PhD. But when I came back, she was Minnesota. And school started over there. And so I knew this wouldn't do, that I'd lose her. And so I had a old Model T Ford had been given to me as a graduation present. I graduated in 3 years. I drove it over, and we were married the next day. But it was her mother's fault and Elsie's. I would have lost her, for sure, if we had done as we had planned. And
right.
I knew we would, and so I ended up feeling kind of grateful to them for
they forced the issue.
Forcing the issue, and
then apparently they tried to talk her out of it or something.
yeah, she was as bright as she was beautiful, and so people would be impressed with her beauty and pay some attention to me, wondering perhaps how I managed to marry a girl like this. And your grandfather, Homer Paul, the one we've talked about, he was in the legislature, as you know, and someone asked him how he felt about the situation, because the governor had insisted on putting the president from the school over in Shawnee in the job. And your grandfather said, well, he didn't know anything about me, but anybody that could marry Cleo had something on the ball.
I hadn't heard that one before. I hadn't heard that one before.
And so that's the way it was. I became acquainted with your father.
Well, I want to ask you about that later when my brother gets here, because he's going to be here.
Huh?
I want to ask you about my father, and my grandfather in a few minutes, because my half-brother Stephen's coming over to the house, and I want him to hear that part.
Sure.
My mother Mary Lynn indicates that you have several stories about her childhood that you might want to tell me.
About what?
About Mary Lynn's childhood. Is there anything you can think of off the top of your head, or should we?
Poor Mary Lynn. I'll never forget the day that Bill wandered off. Hot day. Just a diaper. Sent Mary Lynn after him. Mary Lynn went, here she came. The diaper had come off. He had the diaper in his left hand, and Mary Lynn had him by the other hand, and was kind of dragging him along. And she marched him up to Cleo, and then she put her hands on her hips like this. And she said, "Mother, don't ever send me after this boy again. It's just an insultment to be seen with him." And we used insultment as a part of our vocabulary for quite a while after that, but trying to avoid insultments and so on.
Wasn't there a time when there was gas leaking in the apartment?
Oh yeah.
When was that?
We came back. We had a house on Emlyn Street. That was before I got to be president, and had a 4 furnace, and they did not have a chimney, and it was very cold. We came home, and I went out to the garage to do something. I'd forgotten what it was, it doesn't matter. But when I came in, there came Mary Lynn kind of staggering and acting. I thought she was acting silly, so I said, "Mary Lynn, stop being foolish." And she fell over on the floor, just flat. And I said, "Cleo, something's wrong. Call the doctor." And she went and sat on the phone, and she fell off on the floor.
She fell over too.
Yeah, she fell over too, and then I realized. So I quickly shut off all heat, and opened all the doors and windows, and Mary Lynn came out of it first, and I had dragged your mother in and put her head in the window in the bedroom, and she became all right. And then I turned on a fan to try to blow the air out, and we didn't have any air conditioning, and well, we were just lucky we didn't all die.